How do Trump's accomplishments within the first 100 days stack up against what he promised to do in that same time frame?
My general feeling about it is, for any president in the first 100 days, when they're just trying to find where the electrical outlets are and how the copier machine works, he did a very good job of defining issues. His ability to get things done, it's not just him. It's Congress on the congressional side of things like health care and a tax bill. And implementations or unwinding of regulations and programs depend on the agencies. The agencies are dictated by political appointees over the bureaucracy, and they're not yet in place.
But that's not what he sold on the campaign trail. He, on the campaign trail, said in the first 100 days that there would be plans for a border wall, immigration ban would be in place, that there would be tax reform, or at least a path to tax reform within the first 100 days. It doesn't look like on his major campaign promises that he's delivered on in the time frame that he said.
I don't know that that's true, and I don't know that it's relevant.
Why isn't it relevant? Don't we have to judge our elected leaders?
So if you look at what's happened in the world, if you look at how he handled Syria, how he's handled China, how he's handled North Korea, the man's done an amazing job. And what's been put in front of him is very complex. So he's doing the best job he can under the circumstances that he's got.
We're not judging him by some arbitrary standard. We're judging him by his own standards, which is why I asked you the question. But I understand your point. But let's move on, because you brought up North Korea. Right now, the administration seems to be taking some very untraditional stances towards strongmen, dictators. It's got human rights advocates very concerned that the U.S. is essentially putting its stamp of approval or welcoming these governments who have not had great track records when it comes to human rights. What are we getting in return?
You're mixing things. You're saying that we are advocating human rights violations by dictators in North Korea?
There are two things. One, in North Korea, President Trump said he'd be honored to meet with Kim Jong-un. The regime, as you know, is not a democratic regime. It's a very harsh regime, and people there are suffering. In the Philippines, the leader, as you know, has a war on drugs, killing innocent people. My question is not, whether it's right or wrong or whatever. My question is, what does the United States get or hope to get in exchange for opening its arms to these leaders, including Putin, by the way? It's not just North Korea and the Philippines.
And you're making such blanket statements, I can hardly respond, right?
Okay,
because
well, let me try and rephrase the question.
Let me just finish my retort to what you've asked. I think you're entirely unbased on what you said. The United States is not opening their arms to these leaders. The President of the United States having a dialogue is smart. It's not the United States opening its arms to anything.
He said he'd be honored
let me just finish. I've listened to you, and I'd like you to listen to me, or we can just stop here, whatever you'd like to do. So, an arrow in the quiver of having these discussions with foreign governments is to protect the United States first. You're talking about human rights. The most important human rights that we have is America. That's his objective, in my humble opinion. I'm not his foreign policy advisor. And I can tell you what's happened in the 8 years in the past has not been beneficial to the interests of America, which is the frustration in the system. So I think to concentrate on a statement or a word, which is the job of a journalist, is interesting but not fruitful. So I can't really comment on it. All I can comment on is a continuing foreign policy which is trying to protect American interests first, and this idea of humanitarian interests elsewhere is secondary to the interests of America.
The words of the President of the United States matter a lot to freedom and democracy around the world. We are a symbol of that, or at least we have been, and of holding certain standards when it comes to human rights. So that's why it's important, and that's why people are alarmed by saying he'd be honored. He's not saying, I'm open to talks. I would like to talk about.
But why are you having this discussion? I'm just telling you, I think you're entirely off base. Get behind this President of the United States. It's about America. He needs support, he doesn't need criticism. So to criticize a word against a foreign dictator, in my opinion, is totally off base. You have the freedom of the press to do it, and it's interesting, but most of the people in the world don't care. What they care about is the interests of America, if they're Americans. secondarily the interests of other people.
Let's move on to tax reform. When they made the announcement, Gary Cohn got up on the podium and was asked, how would this impact a family of four making $60,000 a year? Would they save money? How much would they save? And he couldn't answer the question with any specificity. In your opinion, do you think the administration has potentially rushed to make these announcements, and wouldn't it have been better if they had waited and given the American public a few additional details on tax reform?
And I think Gary did as good a job as he can, and Gary and Steve are working in a very fast-paced environment in which Congress doesn't have a lot of bandwidth left to deal with all these issues. But rather than be abrupt and violate Congress's input, waiting as they should for a consensus amongst a congressional group that probably has a different point of view. So I think everybody's expectations are it probably won't be as drastic as some people hope for, and it won't be as weak as other people anticipate.
What do you think will ultimately end up in the plan? Do you think we'll get a 15% corporate tax rate? Do you think that the wealthy, the top bracket will come down? Do you think we'll get a simplification?
Whatever they do on one hand, they have to do on the other. And this is the complication, right? If you have a tax cut and you're reducing revenues and all you're replacing it with is growth expectations, you need to also cut expenditures someplace. But I think the goal is to put more spendable capital in the average consumer's pocket, the average family's pocket. Another $200 or $300 a month to the average family means a lot, and how do you do that?
What are some of the ideas on the revenue generation side?
Well, I don't know. I'm not in the budget process, but I think the reason they're taking so much time is they want to get it right, and they want to get it right with Congress, and they don't want to have a misstep like we had on health care where everybody's not in total agreement. So I think we just have to wait.